And one of his last actions as governor, Deval Patrick signed a bill to help provide for the needs of homeless teens and young adults living on their own. 40% of that population in Massachusetts identifies as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. To talk about their needs and the bill is our guest, the Director of Legislative Advocacy from the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, Kelly Turley. Thank you very much for being with us, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Chris.
First of all, what about just the size of this population? Is this getting bigger, this kind of homeless population?
Absolutely. We're finding that in Massachusetts, all populations of people experiencing homelessness, adults, families with children, and unaccompanied youth are on the increase. National statistics have shown this. Figures from the Department of Housing and Urban Development show that homelessness is an increasing problem in Massachusetts. In some ways, it may not be fair, though, because Massachusetts does have an extensive shelter and support service network for people experiencing homelessness and that other states don't have. But what we find for unaccompanied youth, that Massachusetts up until now hasn't had a robust response to youth homelessness. And so we're looking to be able to bring that to the level where there are services for children and for unaccompanied adults.
Talk about what's happening with these teens and young people, because normally for teens and young people, you know, if they're not going to college or getting a good job, they live with their parents, you know, sometimes into their 30s. So why is that not an option here?
We're looking at a population of young people age 24 and younger, and some of these are young people as young as 10 or 12 who are experiencing homelessness out on their own, which is very shocking. But many of these young people are still in high school, are trying to go to college, and really struggling because they don't have a stable place to stay. So they may not be living on the streets, although some of them are, but they may be bouncing around from friend's house or relative's house, and they don't have any place consistent to stay. But we're seeing that the causes of young people becoming homeless and being unaccompanied are often fights with parents. Oftentimes it's a young person who's identifies as LGBT and they've come out to their family and they've been rejected. Some of the young people, their parent themselves is experiencing homelessness and doesn't have the resources to keep them in the family because they're caring for younger siblings. In other cases, there's drug use or violence in the household, and a young person feels it's safer to run away.
It sounds maybe strange for some viewers. Oh, there's more acceptance of LGBT now, so what's wrong?
We're seeing that for some of the young people that we're working with, that in the larger community, among their peer groups, there's an acceptance of them being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and they feel a sense of security in their peer group. And then when they come out to their parent or caretaker, they don't receive that same level of acceptance, and they're rejected and kicked out.
So how does this legislation help them? Because this is not just about services, but also about, I guess, a commission to look into things too.
Yeah, so there's the new legislation that was signed this week by Governor Patrick as one of his last acts. We think is really a great milestone in the effort to have a more robust response to youth homelessness here in Massachusetts. One part of it would continue the work of the Special Commission on Unaccompanied Youth Homelessness, which was established 2 years ago. And so what this bill does, puts it into statute so that work can continue. And that commission has been interviewing young people across the state to do a survey of the needs and experiences of youth experiencing homelessness, looking in particular at what are the needs and barriers for LGBTQ youth, looking at the needs of youth under 18 who aren't in the care of a parent or guardian and may be avoiding coming forward because they're afraid of getting involved in the child welfare system, looking at the housing and service needs of this population. And that commission has brought together heads of state agencies, providers, advocates, youth, and legislators. And so the goal of including that in the bill is to make sure that that work continues forward. But the main part of the bill directs the state to provide housing and support services that are age appropriate, developmentally appropriate for young people who are experiencing homelessness out on their own. And we know that the bill itself wasn't, an appropriation wasn't attached to it. So we'll be working in the months and year ahead to make sure that the state allocates the resources to make this bill, this law, something that's useful and meaningful for young people who tonight are without a home.
Aside from just having a place to live, what other supports do these young people need?
Right, so the bill also talks about providing wraparound support services. The young people that we've worked with and our partner agencies work with often need more resources so they can stay in school to further their education, whether that's at the high school level or the college level, job training. Oftentimes, young people, the experience of being homeless and out on their own is very traumatizing. So they do need counseling services, basic support services to access food and clothing. So really the educational, the needs, and also around just general support services. So the bill would really look at the needs of youth holistically.
Here's one of the things that is going on here. We're not talking about people who are going to die in the cold necessarily, but you're talking about somebody who at this age, maybe they're couch surfing, and at the same time they're supposed to get their life together. Mm-hmm. What's that like? How's that destabilizing?
Yeah, I mean, in our work with young people, the stories that they share both with us and with legislators at the State House are heartbreaking. Seeing that young people who should be in the prime of their life and really have nothing but hope in front of them are really struggling on a day-to-day basis, having to make really difficult decisions to survive. So we are working with young people who tonight will be sleeping in the Boston Common or in Harvard Square, but many more of them are less visible, and that they are bouncing around from relative to relative and trying to figure out how can they stay in school, how can they find a place to do their homework, how can they make sure that they're getting medical care. And oftentimes young people are put in very difficult positions of what they have to exchange in order to meet basic needs.
Because one of the things you have to do is talk to the legislators, maybe the governor, and make the case for this. And you know, right now we have some very vulnerable homeless people. Some of them have health problems, mental health problems. Then you have parents with small children.
Absolutely.
So how can we take care of this population?
Yeah, at the Coalition for the Homeless, we advocate for individuals, families, and youth across the spectrum. And so we put that in this context, that right now there's a family shelter program. 4,600 families are staying in shelters or motels tonight. We know that those families need permanent housing. There's also an extensive shelter network and housing response for unaccompanied adults. And this population, we haven't even begun to really address their needs. And so getting it on the radar of the legislature and the governor has taken us a few years to get to this point where they were willing to sign this bill. But we have a lot of momentum now, we think, to be able to have a housing-based response, to make sure that those services are available, but keeping in mind that nobody deserves to be without home, and that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to live.
Looking beyond the day-to-day crisis, what happens to young people like this when they don't get the supports they need in the long run? In the long run, we're seeing young people who have so much potential dropping out of school, more and more young people who are getting caught up in drugs. We see there was just a young person that we were working with who died of an overdose recently, but more and more health risks for young people, not being able to meet their basic needs. So we know that this is a vulnerable age, that brain development is still happening, researchers say, until young people are into their mid-20s, and that if they're not receiving adequate nutrition, adequate shelter, that can have long-term ramifications for the rest of their lives. So limiting their potential and trying to make sure that through this bill is that we can do as much on the prevention side as well to get to young people before they're experiencing homelessness, and to build the case that we need to have more of those preventative resources as well. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Kelly Turley from the Mass Coalition for the Homeless. We'll have more news in just a moment.